The rage of the beast filled the space in the moment. All around Jack Harkness the air crackled with fire and electricity, as the great devourer lifted up its whip. A long crack split the air, causing a shockwave that knocked all within the rift from their feet. Gang and hands and feet grasped at whatever they could. Humanoid forms clung to one another. Screams overlapped and built to become one loud, long moan. The devourer had come from Billy's. Once Archie McLeish, he had been sent for Jack. How long Captain Jack Harkness stared at the beast, he did not know. It could have been a second, it could have been a million years. But it was not the end, no, not the end. Because he knew something that Billy's did not. And it started with Mallory Collier. Dear Mallory, where were you in this chaos that is the void? Where are you now the end has come? Mallory, Jack cried, adding to the din. Mallory, and suddenly she was there before him, dressed in her grandfather's army boots, a pearl necklace and some sort of long pattern dress. A part of Jack thought what Owen Harper would have said, have a word, Jack. He told him. Well, now Jack was having a word, and the word was, but before Jack could say his name, Mallory was before him, and she had taken Jack's hands in her own. She was cold, her hands were like iced petals of a flower that had dared to bloom in the depths of winter. Jack, and the pain began. Jack knew what it was that he needed to do, and a moment later, as the devourer lifted up its whip again, to lash it through the space-time void that was the rift, Mallory was lying on the bed in her home. Something was wrong. Roddy had been born briskly and with little problem. Mallory had allowed him to be taken, as Ren had with Mallory, but this time, Mallory was pale, her labor pains were agonizing. Keep going, beauty, Jack told her, holding her hand and then wiping the back of his hand across her brow. For Ianto, for all of us. And then a whimper, and Mallory gritted her teeth. And most of all, Jack broke off, as he squeezed her hand. For you, my darling, darling girl. Something worked. After a short time, in which Jack wished that he could take Mallory's place and do it for her, a small infant was in his arms. David, Mallory told him, in the short time before Jack took him, and flickered her eyes towards her old boss. For Ianto. For Wales. Around the destruction of the rift grew again, and Jack was back in the destruction. A wasteland existed now where once beautiful landscape had been. The river steam trees smoked from their blackened stumps. The sky was grey and murky. The devourer had done its job of sucking the life out of the world, but it had to be stopped. If the rift was breached, Earth would be finished. But a chink of light on the far horizon gave Jack hope. That was the way back, he knew, back through to the Midlands node, the connection point to the rift, or one of them, at any rate. In his arms, baby David shifted in his sleep. He was growing fast here. Once a newborn only seconds before, or so it seemed, he was at least a human-year-old. He snuffled, and went back to sleep. Ignoring the doomed space-time void that the rift had now become, he made for the light, dodging wheeling creatures and creeping beings, stepping over slimeworms and a Cyberman helmet, and he had to hurry. As he neared, Jack realized that the rift was closing, its fissure getting smaller as he neared. In his arms, baby David slept on, through the rumbling, through he screaming. Then, all sound stopped. Around him, like a vacuum, removing all the particles from the bell jar of the universe, all went quiet. Fire had dimmed, and the great devourer, towering over everything, ready to wreak havoc around them all once more, shrank away, diminishing to nothing before Jack's eyes. And then, Mallory was in front of him. She floated just in front of him, ethereal, ghostly, and said nothing, then turned, and began to walk through the apocalyptic landscape, through burning metal and smoky land towards another. Come, Jack cried. Come back with me, Mallory. But, she did not turn, the woman who had done so much for Torchwood and had been recognized to little. Mallory. He called once more, and then he saw to whom she was walking. Her mother, once a genetic experiment, held out a hand. Mallory, Jack saw, needed no encouragement, however. So they were going somewhere, Jack thought, a tightening in his heart as he realized he would never see Mallory again. He turned, heading towards the crack between worlds. And then a hand reached for his forearm. Jack turned, suddenly, and it was Mallory, and she rearranged her grip as Jack turned around to her. I never thanked you properly, he told Mallory. Ianto and me, Mallory told him. David, and Roddy. Her voice trailed off, and she glanced away, releasing her hold on his woolen army coat. Then, Jack stooped a little, trying to catch a glimpse of her face, trying to determine her feelings. Was she crying? He hoped not. Mallory looked up, and kissed young David on the cheek, and planted another on his forehead. He was no longer a baby, and could have easily run alongside Jack. I will look after him, Jack told her. Roddy, too, just as I looked after you for your brother. Tried, at least. And then he bent his head, and kissed Mallory in the lips. Her skin was cold, and he raised one hand and touched his fingers to her cheek. You're cold, he told her, and kissed her once more. It was the end, and they both knew it. Then, Mallory walked slowly, smoothly, towards her mother, who was waiting, still, patient, for her daughter. As he looked, he saw another figure, on the other side of Ren. It was Billis, but he was younger. He was Archie McLeish again, standing beside his lost love. That would be why there was peace, well, relative peace, in the rift. And Jack saw and noticed that the break between realities was growing smaller once more. The price of love, Jack said to the top of baby David's head. Mallory began to walk, next to Ren, who was hand in hand with Archie. Jack nodded, and was about to turn away, when he noticed something else. Was that another figure, hovering in the shadows, towards which the three of them were moving? A moment of weakness in Jack Harkness's mind told him so. When he looked again, Jack saw him there. He was unmistakable. Hold on, Dash, he cried. Mallory turned, and raised a hand. But Jack could no longer see him. Instead, he stood there, watching the three figures until he could see them no more. 88,888,888. Watch out. On a lonely road just south of Stafford, Reese Williams slammed on the brakes. Gwen, gripping her seat belt, turned sharply to look into the back seat. Silent, but looking a little shaken, sat Roddy. He stared back at Gwen in alarm. What the? Reese began, but the figure he had almost hit was now banging on the driver's side window. Reese began, pressing the window button. What you playing at, Jack? Gwen, who had sharper senses than her husband, leaned across. What the hell? It's over, Jack told them, his face lit up with excitement. Over? The rift is closed, at last. The rift will never bother this country again. He leaned back from the window, the last of the sun's rays behind him. Torchwood is over. It took a minute for Gwen to get her thoughts together. Reese, meanwhile, had clocked the 7-year-old holding onto Jack's greatcoat for dear life. Do you want to get in? Asked Reese, hoping that the customary hospitality would be refused. It was, as Jack took a step back from the window. Beside the car, another overtook them, slowing a little and nosing at the interaction between the pedestrian and those in the stopped car. What will you do now? Gwen asked. But Reese had a more pressing one, and leaned towards Jack, thumbing in the direction of the former Torchwood 4. What happened? He asked. Mallory and Ren, Jack told them. They are one with the rift now. Their unity forced the timelines that had made the rift so potent all this time knit back together. Jack leaned into the car, and gave a click of his tongue and a wink to Roddy Collier. Billis was there too, with them. Billis, Gwen repeated. Billis Manger. Archie, he loved her, you know, Jack told her, remembering the pressure, and the explosion. The rift is closed, forever. The timelines belonging to Mallory and her mother are too tangled to be broken. Jack glanced down to his side. An 11-year-old David smiled back to him. Both of those women gave their lives that their children might live, Captain Jack told her. But David and Gwen knew what was about to happen, and their near timelines. She knew what she was going to reply. She cut out the middleman. We can take him, she told Jack. Reese, who was staring out of the window, wondering now how long it would take them to get back to Cardiff now, regardless if there were bridge fees or not, turned his head sharply to his wife. We can, he began, but then, he remembered the times he had spent in the garden, teaching Roddy about football, talking about fishing and walking and generally exploring, how he and his brother at Roddy's age used to go about the wilderness that was now a council estate, but the wild marshland just beyond it was still good for tadpoles. As Jack watched David get into the car, Gwen leaned back, wondering how long her ex-boss had planned all of this. Reese leaned back, making sure both boys had put their seatbelts on. "Thank you, Gwen Cooper," Captain Jack Harkness called to her, stepping back from the car. "It's great knowing you. Keep my boys safe," he added, as Rhys stood up the window. Jack held up a hand, waving as the car pulled off, both Roddy and David's eyes on Captain Jack until they could see them no longer. "What now?" asked Gwen, as they crossed the Severn Bridge 2 hours later. Both boys had dozed off in the back. "What about ... get home first? Enroll in Anwan school?" "What?" Rhys asked. "A Welsh medium school?" "Well, if they are both excellent at learning languages as their mother, Welsh will be a doddle." Gwen looked at her husband, who was intently looking at the road. "Well," Gwen placed a hand on her husband's arm. "What do you say, Rhys?" He turned and smiled to his wife. "I say ... thank you for the money in he bank." He gave a brief smile. "Course," he added, with a grin. "And so ended Torchwood 4, and so began the lives of the Williams family, with 2 additions. A person never forgets their roots, however high their branches spread." And for Roddy and David, their epicenter was Cardiff Bay. Torchwood, a service, provides an opportunity to voice any of your texts, including articles, reports, separate chapters or entire book in a sequence, no more than 30,000 characters at a time. The name of the MP3 file is formed from the first 20 characters of the text. Save the generated MP3 file to your device for storing and future use offline. Please select language and voice. Adjustable speed, pitch and pauses between sentences and paragraphs. Replace this text with yours.